What do you mean?
Silly me.
Do we have a haircut?
Yes, a fresh trim.
Nice.
Look at.
Fresh.
I'll tell you
Nice.
what, I didn't realise how much my hair defined me because whenever I'm feeling a certain kind of way, I know it's because I need a haircut.
All about the hair.
It is. And it looks a bit silly today, but
That looks nice. I like it.
I got a pineapple head. Um, yeah, when my hair gets long and I'm like, oh God, I'm so ugly. I hate myself. Josie's like, go and get a haircut.
Go and get a haircut and I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
nice.
so, yeah,
So you went off and got your fur trimmed.
I did indeed. Got my ears lowered,
Yeah, that's
they
it.
say. As they say.
As they say.
Yes, I am buzzing for this one.
Do you know what? I've tried really hard to forget about the story so that I didn't keep wondering about it and thinking, no, don't look it up. Don't look it up. And I didn't.
So I
But
never,
it's been the longest week.
yeah, no, sorry about that. I never re-listened to the episodes
Oh,
because, you know, if you've ever recorded yourself and then listened to it back, you're like, who the fuck is that?
I hate
So
this.
what the shit?
Yeah.
So I tend to not listen to them back unless we've got to edit, and then you kind of don't really sit and listen to the whole episode. But I, when me and Josie drove up to Rotherham the other day, which is a 2.5 hour trip,
Yeah.
she was going to get a tattoo sleeve, a really
Oh.
cool tattoo sleeve. We've been excited about it all week.
Hmm.
And she woke up in the morning and was sick everywhere.
Oh.
But nevertheless, so we drove 2.5 hours to Rotherham and she was very poorly in the car. And we got there and it was like, no, there's
Oh.
absolutely no point in getting it done. So we drove 2.5 hours back.
Oh, that's shit.
And luckily, I love driving and I love driving to new places and I love seeing the sights and things. So driving doesn't bother me. I love it. But on the way back, we listened to the episode because Josie hadn't heard it yet.
Hmm.
And Art does such a great job with that episode.
We thought so.
No, I tell you what, I listened to it and I was like, you know, when you pick faults, and I was like, oh, that's not how it was supposed to have been said. That's not what I was supposed to say, or I didn't want it to come out like that, or
Hmm.
I'd got a bit lost in my notes and it's not it didn't flow quite as well as I wanted it to flow. But Josie was like, oh, I didn't hear any of that. And she really enjoyed the episode.
I don't
So,
hear it when you say that. When you're like, oh, I don't know, did it come across all right?
yeah.
Like, did you? And I was like, no, I'm right there. I'm right
Yeah.
in that basement.
I think because I literally I know when you write notes you bullet point because you're very good at elaborating and things like that. Words
Not
don't come
always.
easy to me. No. So I write my script as a story and I try to tell it that way. And
Hmm.
so sometimes instead I don't want it to sound like I'm reading, so I tend to come away from that. But then when I flip back and I'm like, oh, I've said it wrong, or I've said the bit that's down there, and you can get a little bit lost sometimes. But it it all came out and I had such great feedback about it that I know that this second episode is going to be even better because I know what it entails.
So excited.
Yeah, so I am really excited for this one.
No, I mean, touching on what you were saying just now, sometimes I really have to like rush my notes. And because I'm like desperate to, obviously, we're on a time limit. We're always on a time limit. We're always on a time schedule. So sometimes I will have to rush my notes, or I try and do my notes when I'm at work, and it doesn't always save, so then I have to go back and do it again and remember what I'd changed and things like that. And yeah, I do apologize for that. Some of my episodes, after we've recorded and I edit and that, I think, oh, I'm really not happy with that episode. I'm really, because I try and do what you do, and I think I'll write it in like story form and so that it sounds like it flows. But the long and short of it is, I don't speak like that, and I don't tell stories like that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I should just like rein it the fuck in.
Do what you do best.
Yeah, and just do how I do it. And like you said, my notes are always like just bullet points, like reminders and prompts.
Yeah. Because
For
when
me
you
to
know
tell
the
the story.
story, when you know it, you know it. So you can elaborate on the points because you know what you're talking about and you know the episodes. And I think your episodes, a lot of people love your episodes.
Hopefully.
Like the Mothman and things like that. Everybody loves your episodes. So
yeah,
I know you love Mothman.
I love Mothman.
Yeah.
But yeah, I shall endeavour to just continue to do it my way, because when I try and do it a different way, it don't work.
Exactly. You do you.
I do me, yeah.
You do you. Yeah. Meanwhile, I have got about 27 pages of this story because mine are not
Holy
bullet
shit.
points. Mine are, this story is 14,264 words.
Oh my.
Oh my.
That is a lot.
Yeah, and I've loved it. I really have loved it because it's been absolutely baffling. But let's crack on, shall we?
All right. Random blams, go.
I was hoping you'd say that because I have come prepared for the first time ever.
Yes. And it's a first for me as well, because the random blam that I have got for you today, I have not got written down anywhere. It's all in here.
Oh shit.
I know.
Scary. Go on, you do yours before it leaves.
Before it goes. All right. Well, this is from my little boy, Lewis. And he told me this the other day in the car. And I was like, I had no idea. So, and I said to him then, I'm going to use that as my next random blam. And he was quite pleased with that. So here it is. Did you know that in every football team, they are not allowed to wear a green top? And I was like,
is that because they
really?
blend in with the pitch?
That's exactly what I said.
Area, yeah.
I went, because you wouldn't see him because of the grass. And he kind of placated me, and he went, yeah. No, so anyway, and I thought, that's not the reason why. But he didn't want to go, no. So I just went, yeah. So anyway, they're not allowed to wear green tops. And I was like, well, why? And he said, because if they wear a green top, it can be used as like a green screen.
Oh.
And people could superimpose anything they wanted on their tops. So they're not allowed to wear green.
Oh, that's interesting. Didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
You didn't know that?
No.
My blam. So I can't remember what episode I did, whether it was the last episode or whether it was the blam. I can't remember. But I did a blam about cocaine and its prehistoric use of treating allergies.
Treating memory loss.
Yeah. Allergies. And so today my blam is about the prehistoric use of heroin and what it was used to treat.
Okay.
So here it goes.
Abundance. Is that what it's used to treat?
So in the late 1880s, heroin was introduced as a safe, non-addictive substitute for morphine. And it was known as diamorphine. And it was in about 1895, so probably like really early 1900s. It says it was found to be 5 times more effective and supposedly less addictive than morphine. And it began being advertised as heroin-laced aspirin. And it was marketed towards children suffering from sore throats, coughs, and colds. Some bottles depicted children eagerly reaching for the medicine.
I bet it did.
With mums giving their sick kids heroin on a spoon.
A spoon, and then it says heroin.
It says doctors started to have an inkling that heroin may not be as non-addictive as it seemed when parents began coming back. Oh, hold on. There we go. When parents began coming back for bottle after bottle. My child's going mad. Give me more.
Yeah, he sold all our stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's mad. Imagine that. But the thing is, in years to come, we're going to be looking back, well, not us, but they're going to be looking back and saying, can you believe that we used to give our children antibiotics? Can you believe that?
Cowpole.
Yeah.
Can you
Can you believe it?
I
I know.
take cowpole by the bottle. Nom.
Crazy. Is that I've never had cowpole.
Oh, cowpole's like the tastes like strawberries. It's like strawberry syrup.
Yeah, I remember giving it to the kids along with their heroin. But
yeah, well, you do literally slip it up in a syringe, didn't you? And you syringe it straight into their face.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Have you seen on the internet that I don't know, that person that needs to give their donkey or their horse and that medication, and they put it in the syringe and then they poke the syringe through the middle of like a satsuma and then they offer it to him like that, and as the horse goes oh like that, they go it's great. I thought that was a great idea.
Great, like a squirt gun.
Squirt gun.
That's a Friends reference for all you friends.
Yes.
Friends
for all you friends.
I squirt it like a squirt gun.
Squirt gun. Like it.
All right then, random blams.
Done. Over.
Yeah, I was going to change it up there, and everyone would be like, "What the hell?"
You've just been telling me to keep doing what I do. This is what we do. Okay, so random blams. Done. There's no enthusiasm behind that.
I didn't realise. So normally when Josie listens to the episodes, she listens to them solo when she's on her drive and whatever else. And then she rings me up and goes, "Did you just say that stupid word?" Or she rings me up and goes, "Ah," like laughs at me about all the stupid things that I say. But I was in the car with her this time and we listened to the whole olive spiel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I bet she was like, "I told you."
I was driving and I was like, do, 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 do.
I know what's coming.
I forgot about this. And then right at the very end, you put about me putting them in the bin. Also, you didn't put the end credits.
What do you mean I didn't put the end credits?
You know, normally it goes, "Thanks for listening to this week. If you enjoyed this week's episode, blah, blah, blah." They weren't on there.
Shut up.
No, I won't shut up. They weren't on there.
I did put them on there. I always put them on at the beginning, so I know they're on there. Oh, I wonder if that deleted on there. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, if you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, please. I can't even remember what it says. We need to do a new one anyway.
No one listens to it anyway. As it get to the end and go boop.
I hope they don't. I leave a little thing at the end normally. Sometimes I don't.
The thing at the end, the thing at the end was there, but there was no credits.
Oh well, that's the most important bit.
Yeah. Right, so should we crack on then?
Let's crack on then. Morning.
Honestly, the morning that you did on last week's episode was just so beautiful. I hear it sometimes in my sleep and I'm like, wow.
You're like, good morning.
Like, yeah, it was so soulful.
It made me like, was that the one where I did the angelic morning and then I went morning?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I have to balance it up. It's all about balance. Yeah. Well, morning, everyone.
Morning. I hope we are all ready for part 2.
Yes.
And before I start, I'm going to trigger warning. So this episode contains depictions of absolutely everything you can imagine. And listen or don't listen.
Yeah, but listen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like do that uncomfortable squirmy thing where you're like, oh.
Yeah, because the screwdriver in the ear thing.
No, we're not doing that again.
We're not doing that again, no.
That can you just tell? Is that going to happen again?
I'm not telling. I'm not going to say anything. You're going to have to listen.
I don't like the screwdriver in the ear.
Yeah. So if you haven't listened to part 1, why on earth would you start part 2? Who just goes straight in with part 2?
Well, they may not know this is part 2.
It will say. Anyways.
Yeah, but sometimes it just auto plays in the car.
All right then. Well, this is part 2.
Welcome to part 2. This is episode 115.
So we are starting off this episode back in Gary Heidnik's basement with the death of 24-year-old Sandra Lindsay.
Oh.
If you remember what happened last time, there were 5 women down there. Sandra was killed. There are still 4 women being held captive. 25-year-old Josefina Rivera, 19-year-old Lisa Thomas, 24-year-old Deborah Dudley, and 18-year-old Jacqueline Askins.
Okay.
So we're back down in the basement.
Mm.
They have all just watched as Gary casually carried Sandra's lifeless body out of the basement. The second one in, the first one out. However, not quite in the manner they had wanted. Sandra's death hit Josefina the hardest. She was essentially the mother of the group. She took care of the women down there, and she had promised them that she would get them all out alive. And she had so far failed. Her plan to win Gary's trust, if you remember, she'd been planning to be as compliant as possible so that Gary would trust her and eventually let her go. That was the only feasible plan that she could come up with. So
she felt like she'd started to see a bit of a human side, didn't she? And got a bit of hope until he was like, so meh.
Sandra's dead.
About Sandra's death, and then she was like, oh shit.
Yep. So this plan that she had, it was slow and it was painful. With the other girls, they believed that Josefina was working with Gary and not against him, and that was true. There was a lot of dysfunction in the basement, a lot of discord between the girls. And Josefina couldn't explain to the girls why she was doing what she was doing, or why her actions often led to the other girls being punished more. She didn't want to explain to them what her plan was because each girl was vying for Gary's attention. So she didn't want them to go, oh, by the way, this is what Josefina's doing, to get in his good books. It would just ruin absolutely everything. So the women were quite separate in the basement. It was kind of the 3, Lisa, Deborah, and Jacqueline, and then Josefina. But she told herself it would all be for the greater good. She knew that her plan would work. She just had to continue with it. The day after Sandra's death, a terrible smell permeated the basement. It was a smell so awful that they could hardly breathe it in. They knew it was coming from upstairs. When Gary came down to rape them in the mornings and give them their bread and water for the day, the smell was on him. It was on his clothes. It was in his hair. And they had no idea what it was until a few days later. Sandra's death had shocked Deborah into submission almost. She was quiet. She was subservient. She didn't scream and shout every time Gary appeared. She didn't scream and shout at the other girls for a little while. And it seemed that she'd finally accepted her fate. They kind of all thought Gary's plan was to impregnate them, keep them hostage, impregnate them. They didn't consider that actually any of them would die. So Sandra's death, almost, they went, oh, actually, we're in a maniac's basement.
Yeah.
We're actually not safe. So Deborah kind of was like, shit, I better get my act together a little bit because that could be me. But she soon snapped out of it. And she went back to being Deborah. She went back to being defiant. She went back to fighting Gary. And she did that. That just wasn't her to be subservient. She was a fighter. So that's what she went back to. And Gary was quite frankly sick of it. He'd had a peaceful basement for about 3 days. And now it had gone back to chaos, full of shouting and screaming and fighting and defiance. And that's not what he wanted. He wanted complete control. He wanted a subservient woman or women. And after spending some time trying to beat Deborah back into submission and get her back down into the pit, he eventually dropped his shovel, and went upstairs. The girls for a second thought that Deborah won, that Gary had been so fed up he'd just gone, oh, you know what? Whatever. Gary had given up. Until he came back down in the basement moments later. He unlocked Deborah's chains and he dragged her upstairs, kicking and screaming. She was only gone for a few minutes, but when she came back down the stairs, she was no longer kicking and screaming. She did as Gary asked while he put her chains back on, and she got willingly back down into the pit. And when Gary left, they all rallied around Deborah, you know, whispering down into the pit what happened, what's gone on, why did he take you upstairs? But Deborah wouldn't say. She said, you know, you won't believe me even if I told you. She was traumatized and she stayed quiet down in the pit by herself. And the girls continued to check on her. There might have been discord in the basement, but they only had each other. So they did rally around and constantly asking her, are you okay? What happened? Tell us, it will make you feel better, you know. And after a few hours, Deborah finally told the girls what had happened. He took me upstairs and he showed me Sandra's head. It's sitting in a pot and he's boiling it on the stove.
Oh, God.
Then he showed me her ribs in a little roasting pan in the oven. And he's got her arms and legs in the freezer. He says, if I don't straighten up, that's going to be me soon. The girls knew now what that horrendous smell had been. Oh. It had been one of them. Oh. Entering mid-February, Gary had started allowing the girls one by one upstairs to have a bath. Each girl used this as an opportunity to try and get on Gary's good side or to try and get treats. Jackie one time came back down from having a bath, back down into the basement, and she had 2 cookies, which are a treat, she said, apparently, that she had gotten for telling Gary what some of the other women were talking about. Jackie, she goes by, she was quite a talker. So I don't think it was anything malicious that she was doing. She was just blah, 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 blah. And she eventually told Gary just different things that he kind of wanted to hear. So he treated her with some cookies. So for Josefina, that was absolute proof that she shouldn't or couldn't share her escape plan with any of the girls. If they accidentally blabbed and told Gary what Josefina was really doing, there was no way that her escape plan was going to work. And after hearing now what had been done to Sandra, she was more desperate than ever to get them all out of there. Day after day, the women were beaten, raped, and starved. Deborah and Jackie spent the majority of their time down in the pit due to their behaviour. Deborah's shock at seeing Sandra very quickly worn off. She went straight back to being defiant, and as soon as she thought Gary had left, she'd go back to screaming and calling out for help and hollering and whatever else. And Josefina was still trying to get on his good side. So she would tell him when he came home what the girls had been doing. She would essentially grass them up. Deborah and Jackie have been screaming every time he leaves. And this led to another round of screwdriver ear deafening that Sandra and Josefina had inflicted upon them. I think actually Lisa was the only one that didn't have this done.
Oh my goodness.
Josefina and Sandra had it done first, and then because Josefina had said, the girl, every time you leave, the girls, they're down in the pit, so they can feel the vibrations. You've got all this music playing down there. That music was playing constantly, all the time, 24 hours a day, this blaring music. So they couldn't really hear too much anyways. So it's only down in the pit that they could hear the vibrations of his car. So, or like feel them. But Gary still thought once Josefina had fessed up and said Deborah and Jackie are doing this, he was like, right, screwdriver time. And he deadened their eardrums. And as awful as it made her feel to see that her actions, like her betrayal, had caused this infliction that they'd the girls have had on them, she knew in her heart that it was the right thing to do. She knew that doing all of these things would eventually lead to their release. She just had to, just get on with it. As much as the girls fought her and argued with her and called her horrible names and whatever else for grassing on them, she was like, it will all be worth it in the end. So she often thought about the baby that was growing inside her. A baby born from a monster. She didn't have any other symptoms of pregnancy other than the fact that she didn't have a period. But she didn't really dwell on it. She'd gained a little bit of weight while she was down there. She thought that perhaps that was pregnancy weight, or it could have been that she was off drugs now. And Josefina had wrongly assumed that Gary would give her more food and treat her better now that he thought that she was pregnant. But he didn't. So their diet consisted of bread and water and the very, very occasional small treat. And things were about to take a bit of a turn, because one day, while Deborah and Jackie were down in the pit watching some TV, Gary had been in the basement with them, and he was doing some bits down there when he heard a dog food commercial come on. And he heard Deborah exclaim how good it looked to her. And this throwaway comment of being willing to eat this dog food didn't fall upon deaf ears. The following day, Gary appeared down in the basement with an open tin of dog food and a plastic fork. He lowered it into the pit and made Deborah and Jackie eat the entire can.
Oh, God.
And while they tried to somewhat resist, they knew it was futile. They were actually starving, and they ate the food in the tin. Josefina and Lisa, ever compliant, were not forced to eat the dog food. At the end of February, on a rare occasion, Deborah and Jackie were allowed out of the pit. They told Josefina and Lisa that they had come up with a plan while they had been down in the pit. And it was a plan that they said would get them all out of the basement. Their plan was basically to attack Gary while he was down there. Deborah said to Josefina, while he's raping me, you sneak up behind him and attack him. And there is, there would be 3 of them and 1 of him. So this plan was no different to any of the other plans that they'd ever come up with. And Josefina said, there is still one problem. We are all chained to this sewage pipe. We can't go anywhere. And Josefina tried to explain to Deborah that if Gary was killed, they would all die down there. But Deborah saw Josefina's negativity as something else. She accused her of having her own thing going on with Gary and said that they didn't need her help anyways. Right. They would execute their plan without her, whether she was on board or not. That's what they was going to do. And Deborah got the other 3 girls all to agree that when Gary came down the next time, there was one part about Deborah kneeling down and then pushing Gary over her and attacking him that way and whatever else. But Josefina could not let them attempt to kill Gary. She knew that it was going to be a death sentence for all of them. Her plan will work. She just needed more time, and time that she wouldn't get if the other 3 girls ruined it for her. So later that day, Gary took Josefina upstairs for a bath. They chatted nonsense. Josefina knew Gary liked to be complimented. He had a very big ego, and she often fed it. That was part of her plan. And Gary asked, just randomly, what sort of discussions had there been in the basement? So away from the other girls, she told Gary of Deborah's plan to attack him and how she had kind of fobbed it off. She said, oh, Deborah's got this plan that she's going to try and kill you next time you go down to the basement. But I told them that it was a stupid idea. You don't keep the keys on you. You're too clever to keep the keys on you. And when Gary took her back down to the basement, he confirmed just that. He told the girls if they ever tried to take him out, they would all die. No one knew that they were there, and he certainly didn't keep the keys to their chains on him, and there was nothing ever left in the basement that they could have used to free themselves. So he went back upstairs and left Josefina to deal with the fallout. So the girls were quite rightly furious at her, calling her a rat, telling her that she should have lied when Gary asked what they'd been talking about. But she claimed that Gary had heard their conversation and had then asked about it. However, there was music playing 24/7. I think that she perhaps fessed up that information of her own accord. But Josefina hadn't wanted to lie to him and risk her plan. If the girls tried to kill him, that was it. But the repercussions of her telling the truth would have devastating consequences. Sick of Deborah and Jackie's behaviour and unwillingness to comply, he decided that beating them was no longer enough. He needed a new form of torture that would ensure they would fall in line.
Oh, God.
It was now middle of March when he came down into the basement with his plan. He ordered Deborah and Jackie into the pit. He slid the board over the top, but left enough room for him to run a hosepipe down into it. And he began to fill the pit with water as the two women sat terrified, the freezing water creeping higher and higher. It reached their waist before, thankfully, it stopped rising. They had no idea what he was doing, but Lisa and Josefina watched from above the pit. They saw that Gary had brought down with him an extension lead. The plug cut off at the ends, the electrical wires exposed.
Oh, shit.
He explained that he was just going to give the girls a little shock, something that will straighten them out. Deborah and Jackie pleaded with him, begged him not to do it. He touched the bare wires to each of their metal chains, the chains that connected them from the pipe down into the water-filled pit and around their ankles. Each woman screamed out as the electricity shot through their body, followed by a period of silence. Gary held the wires there for only a few seconds, and when he released it, the pit was filled with hard panting and crying and just shock. Gary looked at Josefina, her face trying to withhold the horror that she was feeling. Was she next? He beckoned her over to where he sat and handed her the wires. Now you do it, he ordered her.
Shut up.
A million thoughts rushed through her head at that moment. He was asking her to torture her fellow captives, the women that she had bonded with and thanked for keeping her sane for the nearly 5 months that she'd been down there. Was this a test? Was Gary testing her to see if she really was on his side? If he could really trust her? If she failed this test now, her whole plan would be ruined. Hands shaking, heart in her throat, she touched the bare wires to the women's chains, electrocuting them in the pit of water. The screams were enough for Gary to feel like they had learned their lesson. He shouted down to the girls, "Now just you both think about that for a while." He gathered up the extension cord and left. Josefina immediately ran over to the pit. She pressed her face to the small gap in the board and asked the women if they were okay. Both replied that they were, that the shocks actually weren't that bad.
Oh.
Deborah said, "Geez, that sure is a fucked up way to make babies." And that kind of cemented what they all thought. Gary's plan had been to keep these women captive and to have babies, but actually it had turned into something very different. He didn't seem too bothered about whether they had babies or not. Sandra, he thought, was pregnant. She had died, and he just said, well, that's a waste of a baby. He wasn't bothered. Josefina, he thought, was pregnant, but he wasn't bothered about the health of the unborn baby that was growing inside her. And he seemed that sentence itself kind of hit Josefina the hardest, and she kind of thought, actually, his plan to be one big happy family wasn't going to plan. He seemed to now be enjoying the torture and starvation of them of over the rapes.
Yeah.
He didn't think twice about beating Sandra, and she worried that Gary's mental health was taking a downward spiral and that they would all die down in that basement. 2 days later, Gary was back with the extension lead. He placed Jackie and Deborah back down in the pit that was still full of water. He had a few turns, touching the live wires to the chains, hearing the women's screams, followed by the silence, and then the panting as these women tried to catch their breath. You know, imagine being electrocuted. You're all, oh, no, nothing comes
Horrible.
out. And then once that shock's gone, you're like, oh God. And then you catch your breath and you're panting. And he then handed the wires back to Josefina. It's your turn now. She took the wires dutifully, ever compliant, and once again touched them to the chains as she had done before. And the women both screamed out as the electricity jolted through their bodies, followed by silence. Gary again seemed content that they'd had enough, or whether they'd had enough, or whether he'd just gone, actually, Josefina's doing what I've asked her to do, that, you know, test passed.
Yeah.
He took the leads and he went back upstairs. The silence stretched on until Jackie shouted out from the pit, "Debbie's dead."
Oh, shit.
The girls all began shouting and screaming to get Gary's attention, and when he eventually came back downstairs, he lifted the board off the pit and looked down at the two women, both naked, sat in a pool of water with their legs stretched out in front of them. Jackie, trying to distance herself as much as she could from Deborah, whose lifeless body had fallen forward so that her face was in the water. "Thank God for that," Gary said. "Now all my problems are over and my basement can go back to normal." He went upstairs to get the keys to unlock Jackie from Deborah. They had been chained together. He pulled Jackie out, who ran straight over to Lisa, and he then pulled out Debbie and took her upstairs. Jackie was quite obviously shaken. They all were. But it wasn't quite like when Sandra had died. No one shed a tear. They were all too shocked. Without even having time to process Deborah's death, Gary came back downstairs with a pen and a piece of paper in his hand. He handed it to Josefina and said, "Put the date on top, March 18th, 1987. Now the time, 6:30 p.m. Now write this. I, Nicole Rivera, and Gary Heidnik killed Deborah Dudley by applying electricity to her chain while sitting in a pool of water in a hole in the basement of 3520 North Marshall Street." Then he made her sign her name at the bottom. He then passed the piece of paper to Lisa and Jackie and got them both to sign as witnesses. "Now I've got this letter. If you ever go to the cops, I can use this as evidence that you killed Debbie." Because she had. Deborah had died from the electric shock that she had given her. And she felt sick. She had promised these girls that she would get them all out alive. And now she was responsible for killing one of them. She glanced over to the other two women, and it was clear they thought the same. They looked at her in horror. "How could you?" written clear as day on their faces. As she tried to wordlessly communicate with them, Gary bent down over Josefina and undid her shackles. "Now go upstairs and get into bed." Too stunned to think twice, she obeyed without hesitation. She had finally earned her freedom. But at what cost? By killing Debbie, she had been rewarded with the one thing that she'd been working towards. But instead of saving them all, she had led to one of their deaths. Without a single backward glance, Josefina stood up and walked out of the basement, fighting every urge that she had to shout to the girls, "Don't worry. I've got a plan. I will get us all out of here, I promise. Unencumbered by the shackles that she had grown so used to, she headed upstairs into Gary's bedroom. It was a while later before she felt Gary climb into bed next to her. Her head had been reeling. She could have tried to escape as soon as her chains were off, but she knew it wasn't time yet. If she escaped now, what would become of the other women? He would kill them straight away. She had to bide her time, wait for an opportunity that meant that she could get the girls out safely. She dreaded to think what they were thinking of her now. Killer. Accomplice. Partner. No longer a victim. The following morning, Josefina got out of bed before Gary. She went into the bathroom and ran herself a bath. If Gary now saw her as a partner in crime, she needed to act like one. She scrubbed her skin clean, washed her hair, and brushed her teeth when Gary walked in. She asked him what clothes she would wear, and he gave her a pair of his old joggy bottoms and t-shirt. All were far too big for her, but he promised that he would take her out shopping to get new clothes.
That must have felt so nice, mustn't it?
I mean, not really, Kate. She just killed someone.
No, but I mean, like after all that time and being naked and cold and that in a basement, there must have been, obviously, like trauma aside.
Yeah.
There must have been a moment where she thought, oh my God,
relief.
This feels so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be able to like have a bath. She
slept in that bed. That just sleeping in that bed would have been but I doubt she got very much sleep. So Gary had just promised to take her shopping to get some clothes. Outside. To a clothes store. Where there would be other people. He really did believe that Josefina was his partner in crime. He didn't seem concerned at all about the possibility of her running away while out. He had this piece of paper now that he used almost as a, I don't know, not like a bribe, but like a blackmail. Yeah. To say that if he did say to her, if you ever go to the cops, you know, you killed Debbie, you're going to get in trouble. So she tried to act nonchalant. She's like, he said, oh, but you know, I'll take you out shopping. And she's like, yeah, I need some underwear. She never let her emotions show at all, because one slip of the wrong facial expression and her chances of escaping and rescuing the other girls were over. So she just acted as though she belonged there.
Yeah.
She acted as though she had a right to go to the bathroom. She had a right to wash her hair and brush her teeth, you know. She had a right to go down into the kitchen and make herself a cup of tea. So Gary left her alone for a bit while he went down to the basement, presumably to give the girls their bread and water and to rape them. She daren't go down there or let the girls see her. So she busied herself in the kitchen making a cup of tea. When Gary got back upstairs, he sat down with Josefina at the little round kitchen table, and out of the blue, he said, we need to find a place to get rid of Debbie. We, not I. He considered her an equal now. The death of Debbie was both their problems. He told Josefina that they would need to find a place to dump Debbie's body at the moment, because currently he had her folded up in the chest freezer, and he quite willingly showed her. And he said that she will be easier to get rid of than Sandra had been, because he couldn't just dump Sandra's body in case she was found. Her family had known that he was the last person to see her, so the police would then be straight on his doorstep. So Josefina made the mistake of asking what he had done with Sandra's body. And he got up from the table and he walked over to the stove. Atop the stove stood a saucepan, and he beckoned Josefina over. And as he took the lid off, Josefina saw the remains of Sandra's head.
Ugh.
He opened the oven door and pulled out a roasting pan, showing her Sandra's ribs. He then went to the freezer and showed Josefina Sandra's forearms, knees, thighs, and upper arms. He chatted casually to her while he showed her Sandra's mangled remains, and she had to keep herself from throwing up and running towards the door. He said that he had tried to dispose of Sandra by throwing some of her body parts out into the back garden for the dogs, but they ate the flesh and left the bones. He didn't want anyone looking out their house and seeing quite obvious human bones littered his garden. So then he got an idea down in the basement one day when Deborah mentioned that the dog food looked nice. He told Josefina that he had been mincing up some of Sandra's remains and feeding it to the women in the dog food can.
Oh, God.
She felt her stomach heave at the thought, her brain remembering all the times she had watched Deborah and Jackie consume the contents of the can.
Oh.
She gripped the kitchen counter for support when she thought she was going to faint, but Gary just kept on talking, like it was nothing, like it was a normal thing to do.
Ugh.
He said he thought he knew of a place that they could dump Deborah's body, somewhere out in the Pine Barrens. And for those that don't know, the Pine Barrens is a stretch of 1.1 million acres of tree and forest. It's a big place to search when looking for a body. And to Gary, it seemed the perfect place to get rid of Debbie. As he continued talking to Josefina, he grabbed her an old pair of battered trainers for her to wear, and she just kind of followed him around the house as he spoke and as he grabbed bits and bobs and things. They arrived at the front door, and Gary took out his half a key. He opened the door, and just as they were about to step outside, Gary turned to Josefina and said, "I don't have to remind you about that piece of paper, do I?" And she tried to laugh it off. No, of course not.
That
the
whole thing.
Don't worry about that. You don't need to worry about me escaping.
Yeah.
But the reality was, as soon as she was able to escape, knowing the other girls would be safe, she would. But she had to plan it right. So together, they stepped outside. Fresh air hit her face for the first time in nearly 5 months. Smells that she hadn't smelt for months hit her senses. She filled her lungs full of it, trying to expel the dank, musty air of captivity. She had to act normal. She followed Gary to the garage, where she saw his 2 expensive cars side by side, a Cadillac and a Rolls Royce. He got into the driver's side, so she got into the passenger side, and together they left Marshall Street, where 3 other women were still being held captive in the basement below them. And together they drove, Josefina watching out the window as people went about their everyday life, some stopping to stare at the expensive car drive past, looking at the people inside with envy, never knowing that one of them was being held captive and the other was a murderer. They drove for about an hour before Gary pulled into a McDonald's to eat something. Josefina declined any food but sat in the booth with Gary as he ate his food. Should she pretend to go to the bathroom and tell someone what was happening? Should she climb out the bathroom window?
Yeah.
Should she get up and run? No, now wasn't the right time. Terrified of looking at someone the wrong way, she just kept her head down and wished for Gary to hurry up and finish his food. They then drove another half an hour when Gary finally pulled off the road down a small dirt track in the densely forested Pine Barrens. If you didn't know it was there, you would have missed it. And that was a haunting thought for Josefina. How on earth did he know where he was going? How many times had he done this before? After a few 100 yards, Gary stopped the car and got out. He had a small look around before declaring, "This will do." He got back in the car and drove them both back to Marshall Street. The following day, Gary and Josefina were back in the same location in the Pine Barrens, this time with Deborah's frozen body in the back of the car. She waited in the passenger seat as Gary lifted Debbie's body out and dumped her off in the distance. He then drove them both to the McDonald's they had stopped at the day before. She definitely couldn't eat anything now. Gary sat in the booth opposite her, reading the newspaper, checking his stocks, like they hadn't just dumped a dead body in the forest. And she was sure that everyone in there knew what they'd done. Everyone in there was looking at her, knowing what she'd just been a part of. Gary even took the plastic wrapping that had been covering Deborah's body and put it in the bin outside the McDonald's.
Oh, it's blatant.
How could Gary act so normally? How could he be so devoid of emotion that he could kill someone, dump their body, and just go and eat at a restaurant? She started to worry for her plan. At any moment, she could be the one being dumped in the Pine Barrens. One wrong move, one wrong look, one wrong comment. Not only would she be dead, but she believed he would also get rid of the others. Her job, she knew her job was to save them. And that's what she would do. If that meant she had to act normally, then that's what she would do. The following day, Gary took Josefina shopping for clothes as promised. Another trip out into the public. Another opportunity for her to run, for her to escape. But she didn't. Every instinct she had told her that now wasn't the time. She had to gain his trust. The time would come. She just needed to be patient. So the shopping trip was just that. Gary bought her a new outfit and then they went home. After she tried on a new outfit, Gary told Josefina that he needed to take the Rolls Royce to the garage. He said that she should drive the Cadillac behind him so that he had a way of getting home. He added, "Are you a good driver?" She almost laughed out loud at the irony. The day before, he had dumped a body in the woods, and then he'd eaten a McDonald's like nothing had happened, and now he was concerned that Josefina would damage his beloved car. But again, she acted normal. She told him that she was an excellent driver, and he handed her the keys. Trusted her enough to give her the keys to a car that she could drive straight to the police, or even just drive 1,000 miles away. But she didn't. Instead, she followed closely behind him all the way to the garage. Her gut telling her, what would be the good in driving away? He would go straight back and kill the other girls. What would be the point in driving to her family? Gary would be up and gone, and then they would never find him. Then he would just go get another set of girls in a different area. Now still wasn't the right time. After the garage expedition, Gary drove Josefina home. The very next day, he said something that turned her blood to ice and sent her brain into overdrive. "We're going to get another girl."
Oh.
She couldn't say no. Not after how hard she had worked to build his trust. It seemed like every day he was pushing her, testing her loyalty even more, and now was the ultimate test. Throughout her whole captivity, she'd had this plan, earn Gary's trust. And it seemed that she'd done that. The next part of the plan was to escape, and she had no plan for that. And she told herself she would just take every day as it came, just to be patient, bide her time. She would know when the right time was. She had prayed to God for guidance. She had listened to her gut instinct, and now her gut was telling her to oblige. Acting as though she was completely unfazed. She was Gary's partner in crime after all. This didn't bother her. She said, "All right, sure. I'll help you get another girl. But afterwards, I want to go and see my family. I've been missing for a long time now. They'll have reported me missing. I just want them to know that I'm safe. But I can't take you with me because they'll have too many questions. I'll just go and see them, tell them I'm fine, that I've just been with an old friend, and then I'll come and get you and introduce you to them." And without any form of hesitation, Gary agreed. No questions asked. So Josefina left it at that and said no more. It was now the evening of March 23rd, and Josefina was out in the same car that she'd been abducted in months earlier, searching the streets for another girl. She hadn't in all her life expected to be in this situation. It was around 7 p.m, and they were cruising the streets when Gary noticed a woman flagging him down. Josefina recognised her from the streets. It was 24-year-old Agnes Adams. She spoke to Gary like she knew him and said a quick hello to Josefina. And it turns out Gary had paid for Agnes's services a few times before, so she happily accepted the deal of $30 to go back to his place. not even questioning why Josefina was also in the front seat. And the three headed back to Gary's house. And Josefina knew what was coming, knew what was about to happen to Agnes, but she couldn't let on. She couldn't let her tough exterior crack in the slightest. She was playing the long game. As hard as this was going to be for Agnes, she knew it wasn't going to be for long. Taking Agnes was a means of escape for all of them. She just needed to execute her plan. When they got home, Gary and Agnes went upstairs for a short while before he had her naked and handcuffed, walking through the kitchen, past Josefina, and down into the basement. He motioned for Josefina to come with him. She almost froze. How could she possibly go back down into the basement? Not only did she not want to relive the horror of being down there, but she didn't want the other women to see the part that she had played in bringing Agnes down there also. But ever dutiful, she complied. Agnes didn't seem to fully comprehend the situation. She remained silent while he put the muffler clamps on and willingly climbed into the pit when ordered to do so. Josefina didn't even so much as look at the other women. She could feel their eyes on her, feel their hatred and betrayal oozing out of them. And she wanted to shout at them, "Don't worry, my plan's coming together. Just hold on. It won't be long. I'm going to get you all out of here." But she couldn't. So instead, she followed Gary back out of the basement like the good partner that she was. When they got upstairs, Gary turned to Josefina and said, "Okay, let's do your thing now." It was now about 9 p.m, and Josefina rode with Gary for what she was hoping would be the last time. She instructed Gary to stop at a gas station that wasn't far from her family home. She told him to wait there while she went and spoke to them. He could get himself a coffee or something and she'd be back in about 20 minutes or so. "Fine," he said. With her heart hammering in her throat, afraid Gary would see it or at least hear it, she opened the car door and got out. Every fibre of her being wanted her to sprint as fast as she could. But that wasn't the plan. She couldn't be seen to be rushing. She casually walked down the street and eventually turned the corner to where she knew there was a phone box. She was out of Gary's sight now, and her pace picked up. Her strides became bigger, and she reached for that phone like a drowning person reaching for a life vest. She knew she didn't have long. He could come round that corner any second and see her standing in the phone booth, and then her plans would be ruined. With shaky hands, she lifted the receiver and dialed 911. She'd known what she was going to say. She'd rehearsed it, dreamed of it. As soon as the call handler answered, she said, "Listen, I don't have a whole lot of time. I've been kidnapped and held for 4 months in this guy's basement. I've been shackled, beaten, and tortured. There are other girls still there. The guy that did this is waiting for me at the gas station at 6th and Gerrard. I need somebody to come out here and pick him up so that he can't get back to those other girls, because if he does, he's going to kill them." There was silence on the other end of the line before the call handler responded and said, "Can you repeat that, please,
Oh,
miss?"
God.
She tried to explain again and asked them, please just send an officer out to her location. This was a matter of life and death. And luckily they did. The seconds felt like hours as she waited on the street, petrified that every car coming round that corner was Gary's, petrified that he'd clocked on to her plan and then gone home to kill the girls. And she prayed for that police car to arrive quickly, and 10 minutes passed before one turned up. 2 officers got out and looked Josefina up and down. "We've just got a very strange call from here, so can you tell us what's going on?" Josefina explained again, but the officer didn't seem to fully comprehend. They asked her if she was a street worker and asked if this was about the fact that she hadn't been paid. Out of frustration that they didn't believe her, Josefina hoiked up her trouser bottoms and showed the officers the red, bruised marks on her ankles from the shackles, and it was only then that they started to take her seriously. The officers told Josefina to stay put. They were going to go to the gas station and locate Gary. They would send another car to pick Josefina up and then take her to the gas station to make sure that they had the right man. Josefina just hoped and prayed that he was still there waiting for her. It had to have been over 20 minutes by now. It was nothing but a miracle that he hadn't come looking for her. He really believed that she was his partner in this now, that she'd gone to smooth things over with her family and was going to come straight back to him, going to come straight back to continue his plan of impregnating the girls and having his babies. When the other cop car arrived, it drove her the short distance back to the gas station. It felt like she was driving in slow motion. She saw Gary's Cadillac still parked, but he wasn't in it.
Oh.
Fear gripped her stomach. Had he fled the moment he saw the police car pull up behind him?
No.
Was he on the run? No. He was handcuffed in the back of the police vehicle where Josefina identified him as the man that had kidnapped her and 5 other women, 2 of which he had murdered. Gary saw Josefina with the other officers but didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His face said it all. I made a mistake with you. You're not dumb. Finally, it was over. Her plan had worked. Gary was now in handcuffs. There was no way he would be released. She just needed to make sure someone was going to go to his house and free the other girls. While Gary was taken into custody, Josefina was taken to the sex crimes unit, where she was questioned about everything that had happened, and she told them every horrid detail. Verbal diarrhea of the last 4 months came tumbling out of her. She begged the officers to send someone out to check the house and rescue the others, but they had to wait for a search warrant, which came the following morning. While the police located the basement and rescued the 3 scared, naked women, Josefina was taken to the hospital where they conducted a full medical exam. While she waited in the lobby, she saw the 3 women being brought in. Agnes Adams, who had only been down in the basement for less than 24 hours, was still in good physical health. She saw Josefina and pointed to her, telling the police officer next to her, "That's her. That's the woman that kidnapped me." That's how she was viewed. Not as a victim, not as the woman that had saved their lives, or the reason that they were now out of the living nightmare that they'd been in, but as the woman that helped Gary. Gary's accomplice. Gary's partner in crime. She sat back, thinking of the ramifications. She'd never considered that she'd been viewed that way. Everything she did, she'd done to save herself and the others. Finally, the doctor called her back through to give her the results. "You're not pregnant." She would have screamed with joy if her stomach wasn't tying itself in knots. She thought now that she was free of Gary Heidnik, she would get her life back. How wrong she was.
Oh.
The aftermath of Josefina's escape was huge. This was the biggest thing to have happened in Philadelphia, and the news wanted every available interview, and her nearest and dearest were easily bought. They sold fake stories about how Josefina had gone to them upon escaping. And if you've listened to other podcasts on this, you'll hear that some podcasts say that Josefina went back to her ex-boyfriend instead of going to the phone booth. But that's not true. Her nearest and dearest were mostly drug dealers, friends that were on drugs. So the money they wanted, they would tell the media anything.
Yeah.
Her family was brought to see her, as were her children. Her 2 younger children didn't know who she was. Her daughter was a few years old and had been in foster care since before Josefina was taken, and little Ronnie, who had been in an incubator the last time she saw him, was now a healthy, chubby, almost 5-month-old. They had both been fostered by the same woman, and Josefina could see that the children loved her more than they did Josefina. In the months following, Josefina decided to sign consent for them to both be adopted. She could barely function day to day and had no business trying to raise children. She went to see a therapist, but they were going to commit her, and she didn't want to be looked up and confined. She didn't feel like that was the best thing for her. It was the 80s, and mental health help wasn't quite as readily available. No one could really help her or the girls. One therapist actually told Josefina that she was a guinea pig, trying things out and hoping that they worked. And that's not what Josefina wanted. She wanted something to take away the crippling fear she felt every time she left the house. She wanted something to stop the awful nightmares, the PTSDs when certain songs came on, you know, when the sound of metal chinking in the background sent her straight back to the basement. She wanted something that she knew would work. Drugs. And that's exactly what she did. As soon as she was free of the police protection, she found an old friend and got high. Josefina and the other girls attended Gary's trial. There was no question of his guilt. It was a question of his sanity. Was Gary mentally unstable? That was the route his defense attorney had gone down. His defense attorney also went and spoke to the other three girls and convinced them that Josefina should also be prosecuted for her part in the torture, death, and kidnap of some of the women. And this enraged Josefina, that they could blame her instead of thank her, that they believed she had done any of that willingly. If she hadn't have complied, none of them would be there, either dead or still chained up. And the media also put out slanderous headlines about her culpability and everything. When Gary's defense put to the judge charges against Josefina being an accomplice, the judge actually pointed out that for Gary to have convinced Josefina to be an accomplice meant that he certainly wasn't mentally unstable, and his whole defense would be ruined if he went down that route. So no charges were ever brought against Josefina. Gary was charged with the following: murder, kidnapping, rape, aggravated assault, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, indecent exposure, false imprisonment, unlawful restraint, simple assault, making terroristic threats, recklessly endangering another person, indecent assault, criminal solicitation, possession and abuse of a corpse. It took a jury 16 hours to deliberate, but the verdict came back as guilty, guilty, guilty on all 18 counts.
Good.
And he was sentenced to death. While on death row, he didn't want to appeal the decision. He actually wanted to speed it up. He wanted people to believe that a mentally unstable man was being put to death in the hope that the death penalty would then be abolished in Philadelphia. He wanted to be the last person ever put to death in Philadelphia. His estranged daughter, who had never actually met him, appealed on his behalf. But in the end, at 10:29 p.m. on the 6th of July 1999, Gary Heidnik was put to death. The last person to be executed in Philadelphia as it stands to date. So what happened to the girls? I actually have got very limited information. I've got information on Josefina, but none really on any of the others. When little Jackie was rescued, she weighed just 46 pounds, which is a little over 3 stone. She had to learn to walk again.
Jeez.
I've got no information on Lisa or Agnes, but Josefina Rivera went on to write a book called Cellar Girl, and that is why I have so much information, because I have her account of things.
Right.
However, because I have her account of things, there's a really good documentary actually, and it's called Monster Preacher, and it interviews Josefina, and it also interviews Jackie. And it's the first time that they talk about their experience. And Jackie has a very different account of Josefina, because she's viewing it very differently.
Yeah.
She's viewing it as a victim down in the basement, but a victim of not just Gary, a victim of Josefina as well.
Right.
So she absolutely detests Josefina. And it's very clear in the interview that she believes Josefina should have gone to prison. She killed Debbie. She should have been held accountable. You know, she beat some of the girls as well. She should have been held accountable. And that was how Jackie viewed it. She didn't have to do those things. She did them willingly. She complied. And she absolutely blames her for the death of Deborah. And she feels like that what she kept saying throughout the interview was that she has never apologized. She has never once said, I'm sorry for doing any of those things. And she felt like she was completely on on Gary's side.
Yeah.
And at the end of the documentary, the girls meet up, and it's something like 16 years later. And the last time they saw each other was down in the basement.
Bloody hell.
And all throughout the documentary, Jackie is saying, I don't know what I'm going to do when I see her. I don't know whether I'm going to punch her. I don't know whether I'm going to scream in her face. I don't know whether I'm going to hug her. I don't know whether I'm going to thank her. And it's very, very interesting to get both girls' point of views.
Yeah.
Because when you read the book, there is a very in-depth account of everything that happens. Debbie's death, there's not a lot of information. There's not a lot of information either on when they pick the Agnes up. So I feel like she kind of wrote the book and then skimmed over those bits.
Yeah.
Whereas speaking to Jackie, there's, you know, the emotion and the feeling behind it. And Jackie just, after the death of Debbie, that was a massive turning point.
Was it, refresh my memory, who was in the pit chained with
Jackie?
Debbie? Oh, it was Jackie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Jackie had been electrocuted by Josefina as well. Right. So you can imagine being on that side of it, and you would blame that person, wouldn't you? So it's very interesting to get both different sides of things. But actually, when they do meet up, it's a very lovely meetup, and both of them really connect, and they kind of discuss what happened. And, you know, because Jackie has never heard Josefina's side of it. She got the side that was printed in the media. She got the side that was the defense attorney put across. She never got Josefina's account of why she'd done those things and what her plan had been all along.
Yeah, well, she would have seen it firsthand for herself as well, wouldn't she? Because she would have only seen Josefina with Gary.
Yeah.
And saying, right, you know, come on, get yourself upstairs, get in that bath, and you know, and all that, and her just, you know, going upstairs. But
Jackie saw when they came down with Agnes, and Josefina was wearing new clothes. Jackie went, he's taken her shopping. Why the fuck didn't she escape? She's been outside. You know, that was what all of them wanted. All of them wanted that freedom, and Josefina had it and did nothing with it. So for Jackie, it was like, obviously Josefina was on his side. But by the end of this meetup, they kind of talk it through, and they kind of both agree that they need each other, because they shared that experience. They've got no one else to talk to that knows what they went through. And both of them have had their massive struggles afterwards. And it felt quite nice, you know, talking to somebody that knew what the other one felt.
Yeah.
And Josefina said, looking back, there is nothing that she would have done different in that situation. She said, I wanted everybody to make it out. My whole intention was always to make sure I was somewhere safe and the girls were safe. And at the end of the day, that is what she did. There was a lot of things she had to do in order to reach that point. So, who was Gary Heidnik, and how did he turn into a man bent on kidnapping women and having lots of babies? And this is another story entirely. Gary Heidnik's past reads like a standard serial killer spreadsheet. His past convictions spoke of his intentions, with previous stays at different mental health facilities, one doctor writing that he should never be let out as his crimes would escalate. And 8 months later, he took Josefina. But this is a story for a Blam. So if you've got any other questions about this case, I will answer them in the Blam. I haven't included all of the information from the court case because there's just so much. So if there's anything you want to know, email, text, private message, and most importantly, subscribe. Because even if it's just to listen to that one episode, you are in charge of managing your account and you can cancel it anytime. But that episode. If you've got any questions, I will answer it in that episode.
Yeah, that's well handy, because I've got some things that might be a little bit controversial to put to you, some questions that I would like to see if we can find like the answer to. But yeah, I'll save it for.
Well, I would like to have a little bit of a discussion now about, what you think, because I said at the very, very beginning of this episode, this story asks of you, what are you willing to do in order to survive?
That's right.
And for the other girls, for Debbie, she would never have complied with Gary. She would never have beaten the other girls. She would never have done the electric shocks. But Debbie died.
And she died, yeah. Well, I guess you never know, do you? You never know until you're in that situation, because you can sit here and go, well, I wouldn't have done that and I would have done this. But you can only confidently say these things if you've seen the end of the film. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know how it turns out, or you've read the script. You don't know, do you? You don't know that it's all going to kind of work out okay if you do that, or
It's the same with the Colleen Stan. So on our TikTok, we've got an overview of what happened to Colleen, and so many people comment, oh, well, she stayed for 7 years, she could have escaped. People don't understand that I've forgotten what the fucking word is. What's that word? Stockholm syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
People don't understand what that is, or what that does to a person. And because Gary Heidnik is the only person keeping them girls alive. He feeds them every day. And people cling on to that. They're like, oh, thank you for coming back, and thank you for bringing me food, and thank you. They're so grateful for that. And that turns into a love almost.
Yeah.
He's so kind to me. He brings me bread, he brings me water. He every now and then takes me upstairs to have a bath. He's so kind to me. That is how it's viewed, and people don't understand that.
I don't understand that, and I hope that I never get the opportunity to understand it on a better level. But I don't know. I think I would have been with the girls in the view of,
let's kill him.
I would rather die of starvation or dehydration than be tortured and raped every day.
Yeah.
So let's just kill him, take him out, and then we'll worry about everything else after. Do you know what I mean? We'll pray for a power cut so it cuts the music out, or I don't know. I just think, me personally, I would like to eliminate the most instantaneous danger, which would be that person, which would have been him.
Yeah.
So I think I would have been like, let's take him out and then we'll deal with everything else after. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why it's so interesting, because that exactly was Debbie's plan. Whereas Josefina's plan was, I've got to play the long game. Yes, there's dangers here in the present, in the now, but actually, if we eliminate that one danger, the danger afterwards is worse.
I do get that as well. I do think, lull them into a false sense of security and then make you move. I'll tell you now, I'm not 100% convinced that I believe everything from Josefina.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. It kind of feels a little bit like potentially maybe they almost got caught and she thought, oh, shit. I don't know, because I think it's not the right time. It's not the right time. I was kind of thinking,
when is the right time?
Yeah, you're not playing with your lives, your life at the moment. You're kind of playing with the other girls' lives and that as well. They're all still in the basement, and you're, driving Rolls Royce around, going shopping, going into McDonald's and things like that. It's like now is the fucking time. Do you know what I mean? You could have done something. She could have stood up in McDonald's and, you know, screamed for help and said, I'm being held hostage. You know, someone call the police. Don't let him leave.
Yeah.
I don't, it's all very well to say that in hindsight, but I don't know. It's something's not sitting right with me with Josefina's whole story, and I don't really know why.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because she wasn't seen as a victim in the end. She was seen as a partner in crime. You know, she was seen as she'd done these things willingly. She could have escaped any time she wanted. She wasn't a victim. I think if you've been held captive for that long, it doesn't matter what you do, you are a victim because all of your actions are because of what's happened. And I think that she really desperately wanted to save those girls, and to wait for that long, I don't know, I feel like if she'd rushed it and not taken the right opportunity or not thought it through properly, then absolutely he would have gone home and killed those girls. And then you would have to live with that.
But by all accounts, she's been through some absolute horrors by him. You know, she said that she scrambled out the window, and, you know, he was dragging her back in. He almost ripped her foot off for pulling on that chain. And at what point do you keep putting yourself in danger? She knows that he was a bit of a, like, he could flip the switch at any moment. You know, he was comfortable and friendly with, you know, that other girl. I can't remember her name. The first girl that passed away. Sandra. And then he was like, oh, waste of a baby. That's annoying. And then took her upstairs, dismantled her, and started cooking parts of her and all that. And you think, if she knows that about him, she knows he's really unstable and he's evil. Why, when you had the first opportunity to leg it, even if he went home and killed the girls, would you really continue to, day after day, put yourself in that kind of danger just on the premise that he won't go home and kill the other girls? I don't know.
She did also, after she was free and she went back to drugs, to feed her drug habit, she went back on the streets, and she got into somebody's car and he pulled a knife on her. And she went, oh, for fuck's sake, not this again. And she kind of went, do you know what? You know, she kind of, she was like, what are you going to do? I've been through well worse than this. And that kind of put the other guy like on the back foot, and he was like, what do you mean? And he ended up kicking her out of the car. But so she continued to put herself in danger even after she was free. But then she decided, she actually kind of thought to herself, she was like, I'm putting myself in these situations, I've got no one else to blame but myself. So she, I mean, which isn't true, because obviously people shouldn't do that, but she is putting herself in a situation where she is vulnerable. And she did stop working the streets, but just her story is crazy.
It's a crazy story, and I don't think you can properly say what you would do unless you're in that position, because you don't know, do you? It's like Alan Ralston was his name, Rollins. Aaron.
Yeah, he chopped his arm off.
Yeah, and even he said, if you'd have said that I would do that,
chop my arm off,
before the accident, I would have said absolutely not. I would have stayed there and I would have died. But sometimes you just do what you got to do. So
well, if you want to hear the Blam, then you have to make sure you subscribe. It's $3 a month, and you literally can cancel it whenever you want. So if you just want to listen to one episode and cancel it, by all means, you are in charge of managing your account, and it's very easy to do so. But I am going to go through who Gary Heidnik was in that episode.
That would be great. And on the note of subscribers and members of our Blamily, we need to do a shout out. And this shout out is for Philippa.
Flip flop.
I don't call you Philippa, I call you Flipip.
Flip.
So Flipip, thank you, darling. It is very much appreciated. Yeah, we literally couldn't do this without our Blamily. So Flipip, you are now a part of our Blamily. So welcome. And just as a side note, am I right in saying, Sarah, that to access the Blams, when you subscribe, you get an email sent through. There will be a link in the email. You just need to click and follow the link, and it will
So
you access.
There's a few links, and those links are Apple, Good Pods, whatever system you listen to a podcast on, apart from Spotify. If you listen on Spotify, for whatever reason, they don't allow additional content, so you have to then choose another podcast host to listen to that on. You choose whichever one you want, and then on that feed will come up.
Okay. Cool.
That's how that works.
Amazing. So thanks, Flipip.
Yep. And if you've got any feedback at all, send it our way.
Yeah.
Did you like the episode? Did you not like the episode? Was there anything in there or not in there? Let us know.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't like any episode, I don't want to know. You can tell Sarah if you want. I don't want to know. Yeah.
All right, then.
All right. I'll catch you all on the next
one.
On the
flip side. Bye.
On the Flipip side.
Flip.
Bye.
Bye. If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye. No, I'm doing that bit again. Fucked it up already.